Well, also with me to talk about this story, Philip Turle, our foreign editor. And Philip, look, this shift to the right on migration issues by the EU was almost unthinkable just a couple of years ago. So why do you think we're seeing such a shift now?
Well, if you remember what Angela Merkel said back in 2015 when all those migrants are coming into the EU from Afghanistan and from other countries in Syria, for example, she was saying, well, we can do it. That's certainly not the tune that's being played right now. I think there's growing hostility towards migrants coming into the EU. And many leaders within the EU, what they're doing, they're looking in their rearview mirror thinking, if we don't do something now, we're going to see the far right getting even more ground and gaining more support for the next elections. For example, here in France, Marine Le Pen is keeping an eye on the opinion polls, hoping to be elected after Emmanuel Macron stands down in 2027. So migration is one of the key issues, and migration is constantly being debated. And I think the second point here is that the EU doesn't really have another solution. It was unacceptable a few years ago, you're quite right, but no one's come up with anything better than to say, OK, there are two things we really need to sort out. First is deportations, and the second one is migrant centres or hotspots where they can be treated, but not in the European Union itself. They can be treated outside. And then we'll decide whether or not they get asylum, they can come into the EU. If they don't get asylum, they can be sent back to another country, preferably to their own country. But all of that needs still to be worked out. So it's not an easy solution, but I think the basis of it is fear of the far right gaining ground. And in some countries, the far right has gained ground. And you mentioned Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister. This has been one of her key election issues, bringing down migration into Italy. And I think the figures in Italy are making many other leaders around Europe thinking, well, that would be great if we had the same sort of figures where we are. 105,000 migrants landed on Italian shores a couple of years ago in 2022. Only 54,000 have come so far this year up until October. So we have seen a 61% fall in the number of migrants coming into the country. And on top of that, they're now sending migrants who want to apply for asylum to Albania, which means that it's, in the eyes of the Italian government, there are going to be even fewer people coming into the country. Ursula von der Leyen has given her green light towards that. So I think a general push to the right and a general showing that there's not really much else that they can come up with to try to fight the number of migrants coming into the EU.
Right. And on that Italy-Albania deal, do you think it will deter migrants from coming into Europe or into Italy specifically? That
is the really big question. If you look at, for example, what has been going on in the UK over the past few years, you have these migrants who come for thousands of kilometres getting into Europe, many of them risking their lives to do so. They are not going to want to give up by being put off by the threat that they could be sent to a centre somewhere. They still think, many of them, they can get there. And if you talk to migrants on the northern coast of France who want to go to the UK, they say, we've come all this way, we just have the channel to cross, we're going to go over, whether or not we risk losing our lives or whether we risk being deported. I think there may be some who might think twice, but I think the general gist of it is that they don't want to go home because life there is so dire and so terrible and there's no future. They've come all the way to Europe. They're either just on the outside of Europe and they want to get in, but they're not going to give up now. So in answer to your question, maybe a few migrants will think twice about trying to come to Europe, but I think the major number of migrants will continue trying to get here, and that's still going to pose a problem for the European authorities. It didn't work as far as the Rwanda policy in the UK was concerned. Will it work as far as Albania is concerned? That's not the only country that's coming up with ideas to send migrants elsewhere. The Dutch government is thinking about sending them to Uganda, getting them to apply for asylum there and to come to the European Union. But remember, when the Rwanda policy was being discussed in the UK, it wasn't even a question of when the migrants get political asylum, they'll be allowed into the United Kingdom. They were being told they could stay in Rwanda. So a lot has still got to be decided.
Philip Turle, thanks very much.